What if a single drone could turn one of the most heavily defended cities on Earth completely dark in under 1 second? At 10:31 p.m. on December 27th, Moscow's night split apart without warning. A sapphire blue flash tore across the skyline, followed by a pressure wave that rippled through frozen streets and glass towers. Just moments earlier, the VDNKH festival had been blazing, with over 100 million neon lights. It was glowing like a Russian version of Disneyland, a carefully staged promise that everything was fine. Then the light surged once and vanished. This wasn't a random blackout. Kyiv had just delivered a message. If you play games with Ukraine's power switches, they won't simply flip yours back. They will rewrite how your power flows. In less than 20 minutes, a drone operation costing under $100,000 forced one of the most heavily defended capitals on Earth into darkness. Meanwhile, millions of dollars in air defense missiles burned through the sky, chasing shadows. If you want clear, step-by-step breakdowns of how modern warfare actually works, not headlines, not hype, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications, because what happened in Moscow isn't an exception. It is a preview. 10:03 p.m., December 27th. The lights of VDNKH glowed like a frozen sun over Moscow. Within seconds, that glow began to flicker. Deep inside Losiny Ostrov National Park, 6 GUR operators waited in absolute silence. The target wasn't soldiers. It was a transformer buried under the city's illusion of safety. 2 Dove Bush T-10 drones sat on portable launch rails. Each weighed 68 kilograms, built from carbon fiber, with a radar signature no larger than a bird. Under their wings hung 6 WASP FX drones, compact, fast, and deadly accurate. At 10:07 p.m., the first T-10 launched. The air cracked as it climbed to 180 kilometers per hour, hugging the Yauza River at a 50-meter altitude. Its composite body blended perfectly with the radar clutter. Russian Pantsir S-1 operators caught faint movement on their scopes. It was uncertain, low, and irregular. Then, dozens of decoy gliders appeared. Small, foil-lined wings that imitated cruise missiles. Believing they were under attack, the Pantsir crews fired 6 57E6 interceptors, each worth nearly $1.3 million. The sky erupted in streaks of white fire, but the radar returns did not fade, because there were no real missiles, only paper and carbon fiber falling through the snow. In less than 2 minutes, Russia had spent $8 million destroying shadows. The Dove Bush T-10 slipped through the gaps, unseen and unchallenged, heading straight to the city's northern power quarter. Moscow didn't know it yet, but its festival lights were already living on borrowed time. 10:18 p.m. The Dove Bush T-10 skimmed above the Yauza River, flying so low that its shadow rippled across the ice. Moscow's defenses were still chasing ghosts in the clouds. Below the radar coverage of the main air defense array, the drone drifted through a maze of power lines and bridges at 170 kilometers per hour. Its altitude was barely 55 meters. The operators in Kyiv watched in silence as telemetry flashed green. At the 10-kilometer mark, the command came: deploy WASPs. 6 WASP FX drones detached, spreading like sparks across the night. Each carried a 2.5 kilogram shape charge and flew with independent AI navigation. Russian Pantsir S-1 crews detected the swarm too late. Their screens filled with hundreds of false signatures. Autocannons opened fire, spraying 500 rounds per minute into empty air. 2 WASPs vanished in the storm of tracers. A third clipped a rooftop antenna and exploded mid-air. The remaining 3 dropped altitude, weaving through the apartment block. One dived into a secondary substation, triggering a brief power loss that cut electricity to 8 city districts. For a few seconds, the capital skyline went dark in patches. It was a warning of what was coming next. At 10:27 p.m., the first Dove Bush turned west, preparing to exit. Behind it, Russian searchlights swept the sky. Convinced the attack was over, crews began reloading their missile tubes. They were unaware that a second T-10 had already been armed and was approaching from the northwest. It carried 6 new WASPs with upgraded navigation and hardened signal cores. The trap was only half sprung. And here's the question for you. If one drone could drain Moscow's power in minutes, what happens when the next wave arrives? Stay with me. The real strike hasn't even begun. At 10:31 p.m., the night over Moscow ruptured without warning. A sudden sapphire flash split the skyline, sharp and absolute. It turned snow and concrete into mirrors of electric blue. For a brief moment, the city looked frozen inside a lightning bolt. Then the shock rolled outward, rattling windows from the Yauza River to the outer ring roads. Minutes earlier, Dovebush T-10 No. 2 had entered the city from the northwest. It flew at a 58-meter altitude, slow enough to blend into ground clutter, fast enough to cross 8 kilometers in under 3 minutes. When it reached the release line, 6 WASP-2A drones separated cleanly. Each carried a 2.4 kilogram shaped charge and an upgraded onboard processor, hardened against interference. Russian defenses reacted instantly. A Krasuka-4 electronic warfare unit flooded the airwaves with more than 600 watts of broadband noise. 2 WASPs lost external control and dropped into the frozen river. A third was intercepted by a Pantsir S-1 autocannon, shredded before it could descend. The remaining 3 did not slow down. With radio and satellite links suppressed, they shifted to autonomous navigation. They matched streetlight patterns to a preloaded 3D model of Moscow. One drone took rifle fire through its housing, but continued on course. It slammed into a diesel backup tank, igniting a vertical fireball that swallowed the perimeter fence. Out of that smoke, the final WASP emerged at 225 kilometers per hour. It locked onto the primary 220 kilovolt transformer and struck at a shallow angle. The shape charge cut through steel and insulation, triggering a bolted fault inside the unit. In less than a millisecond, over 65 tons of mineral oil overheated and expanded violently. The electrical arc climbed nearly 30 meters, burning blue against the clouds. Circuit breakers across the northern grid failed in sequence. Power collapsed across 11 districts. The lights at VDNKH surged once, brighter than before, then vanished completely. By 10:39 p.m., Moscow's center was silent. Screens went black. Music stopped. The city stood in darkness, not from chance or error, but from a strike measured in meters, milliseconds, and maths. 10:40 p.m. The battle didn't end with the blackout. It simply moved inside the systems meant to prevent it. Across northern Moscow, Russian air defense crews were staring at screens that no longer made sense. The radar picture was saturated, cluttered with false echoes, heat noise, and fragments of targets that no longer existed. The Pantsir S-1 batteries had done what they were designed to do: fire fast and often. In less than 15 minutes, several units had emptied their launch rails. They expended 12 interceptors each, burning through more than $16 million in missiles. What followed was the quiet problem no brochure advertises: reload time. Even under ideal conditions, a Pantsir needs 4 to 6 minutes to crane fresh tubes into place. In combat conditions, under stress, it takes much longer. The autocannons weren't ready either. After sustained firing of nearly 4,000 rounds across multiple rooftops, barrel temperatures pushed beyond safe limits. Crews were forced to pause or risk warping the riflemen, turning precision weapons into liabilities. For a brief window, Moscow's layered shield thinned to almost nothing. Command tried to compensate. A Tor M2 unit held in reserve near the city center was brought online, but its engagement envelope was narrow, and its missiles were limited. 2 launches followed, both chasing fading signatures left behind by drones already destroyed. The system reported success. The target data did not. Inside the power grid, the damage was cascading. Automatic breakers tripped in sequence, isolating entire sectors to prevent further overload. Control rooms lost telemetry. Backup generators failed to synchronize. What had started as a single strike now propagated through substations and switching yards like a delayed echo. By 10:54 p.m., Moscow's defenses were intact on paper, but hollow in reality. The weapons were still there. The operators were still at their posts, yet the city remained dark. Not because the shield was gone, but because its timing had been beaten. 11 p.m. Moscow was no longer fighting drones. It was fighting the consequences. Across the northern grid, operators watched as power failed to return on schedule. What should have been a localized outage expanded into a regional shutdown. It stretched across 12 administrative districts and affected more than 3.5 million residents. Street lighting remained dark. Transit systems stalled. Emergency generators coughed. then fell silent one by one. Satellite data told the story Moscow would not. Infrared sensors recorded a thermal spike at the strike site that climbed nearly 900% above baseline. It persisted for over 20 minutes. Inside the damaged substation, transformer cores had warped beyond repair. Replacement timelines stretched from weeks into months. This was slowed further by the absence of sanctioned high-voltage components. Engineers could isolate the damage, but they could not reverse it. Official statements called it a minor technical disruption. The grid control logs disagreed. Load balancing algorithms failed repeatedly as voltage stability collapsed across interconnected lines. Each attempted restart triggered protective shutdowns elsewhere. This forced technicians to choose which districts stayed dark and which could be brought back online. The economic cost mounted quickly. Preliminary estimates placed infrastructure losses above $280 million. This did not count indirect impacts from halted commerce, transport delays, and emergency response deployment. All of it traced back to a strike whose total hardware cost remained under $80,000. Beyond the numbers, the psychological effect was immediate. The New Year's festival had been designed to project certainty and control. Instead, it delivered silence and cold. In a city built on the promise of stability, darkness carried its own message. By the end of the hour, Russian air defense units were being redeployed inward. They were pulled from outer regions to reinforce the capital. That shift left gaps elsewhere. Gaps that could not be closed without exposing something else. The lights would return eventually, but the illusion they supported had already burned out. 11:18 p.m. The sky over Moscow had gone quiet, but the operation was not finished. In Kyiv, analysts were already dissecting the data stream. Flight logs, thermal maps, radar responses, and reload intervals. Every second of the strike was being measured and archived. What mattered now was not the explosion itself, but what it revealed. The engagement exposed a pattern. Russian defenses reacted quickly, but predictably. Pantsir S-1 units fired aggressively, averaging one interceptor every 11 seconds during peak contact. That tempo looked impressive until the magazines ran dry. Reload delays stretched past 6 minutes on several rooftops. Electronic warfare systems flooded the spectrum, but their power output spiked so sharply that coverage became uneven. This left corridors temporarily unguarded. From Ukraine's side, the lesson was clear. The strike confirmed that layered defenses could be overwhelmed, not by mass, but by sequencing. Decoys forced early commitment. Low-altitude carriers exploited geometry. Autonomous navigation defeated jamming. Each element alone was manageable. Together, they collapsed the timeline Moscow relied on to stay protected. Financially, the exchange was lopsided. Russia expended an estimated $19 to $21 million in missiles, ammunition, and emergency deployments. Ukraine's losses totaled fewer than 14 airframes, valued at roughly $85,000. But the deeper cost was strategic. For the first time, Moscow had to acknowledge that its capital required constant, resource-heavy defense. This is a posture that cannot be sustained indefinitely. By midnight, orders were already circulating to reposition air defense assets from border regions toward the city. That movement stabilized Moscow, but it weakened everything else. Every system pulled inward created exposure somewhere farther out. The strike did not end the war. It recalibrated it. From this point forward, every light in Moscow would be a reminder that protection was no longer guaranteed. It was only negotiated minute by minute against an opponent that had learned how to turn timing itself into a weapon. What happened over Moscow was not merely a blackout or a dramatic end to a holiday celebration. It was a carefully measured demonstration of how modern warfare now operates at its most effective level. There was no overwhelming firepower, no mass formations, just timing, geometry, and an understanding of how complex systems behave when pushed out of rhythm. In less than half an hour, a capital built to project stability was forced to confront its own fragility. This strike made one thing unmistakably clear. Modern defense is no longer about stopping everything. It is about managing overload. Radar crews reacted correctly. Missiles launched as designed. Electronic warfare systems saturated the spectrum. Yet the system still failed. Not because it was obsolete, but because it was predictable. Every response created a delay. Every delay created a window, and every window was exploited. The financial imbalance tells only part of the story. Spending tens of millions to intercept targets that cost a fraction of that amount is unsustainable. But the deeper cost is psychological. A city that must defend itself every second can never truly rest. Once uncertainty enters the equation, confidence drains faster than electricity ever could. The lights at VDNKH will eventually return. The music will play again. Official narratives will insist this was minor, temporary, and contained. But the memory of that silence will linger. For the first time, darkness arrived not from accident or weather, but from intent. It was deliberate, calculated, and repeatable. Now think about what comes next. If air defense systems are pulled inward to protect Moscow, where does pressure shift outward? If protection becomes concentrated, where does vulnerability grow? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. And if you value clear, tactical breakdowns that go beyond headlines and slogans, make sure you are subscribed, because what you just watched wasn't an exception. It was a signal of how this war is evolving.